Hello, this is Laudelina Martinez from the Martinez Gallery. And this afternoon, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Gary Masline, who is a visual artist in the capital region of New York. Hi there. How are you doing?
I'm good, Laudelina. How are you?
Good. I'm always curious as to how it is to have been born in places other than Puerto Rico. So I know you were born in Webster, New York, near Rochester. How was that? How was your childhood?
It was an interesting time to grow up in the 50s and early 60s because during the post-war period generally, there was an explosion of all kinds of things. People were buying homes for the first time, going to school and buying homes with a GI Bill. And, I was a child of that time. So I lived in a suburban neighborhood carved out of orchards and woods, and Kodak was the big employer. So visual arts were everywhere. Most of my neighbors worked at Kodak, their parents. And there was also a message, I think, related to that you can do anything. Coming out of World War II, there was this great release of energy and potential. And so that was conveyed to us as children, that you can pretty much grow up to do anything. My parents liked movies and took my sister and I, more than the average parent probably, to all kinds of movies. And that's when I made the transition from movies to films. Other than that, I had a typical upbringing, a lot of playing outside and sports and running around in the woods and the orchards. And in school, I aspired to do what I was supposed to do, studied hard, I did well. I was in National Honor Society and student council and a varsity athlete and all of that. And prepped for college, and who knew what was coming.
So was there a lot of attention given to the arts in school? I gather that in your environment, because of Kodak, there was a interest in that. But what about your school? Did the schools have arts programs?
I'm sorry to say there were not. I mean, we had art classes. There was like one class that you took up until junior high, which is now called middle school. And, I was in an academic track and they were separate, unfortunately, at that time. So I had no exposure to the arts other than through films.
I see. But you were interested in films, as you call them, or movies, as the popular culture will call them. And after your baccalaureate degree at Lafayette, you actually did a degree in law. What took you from that to law?
Well, let's back up a little bit. Actually, at Lafayette College, here I was with my interest in films. There was no art department. There were courses in art, and I took a lot of art history, which kind of opened me up and broadened my view of what art was. Everything from ancient art to the obvious things like, medieval art. And I was so frustrated with the movies that were around. They were, no offense to Doris Day, but they were these Hollywood rom-coms that kind of bored me. So my interest in foreign films, independent films, I looked around, there was nothing going on. And so I became president of the Fine Arts Society and brought those films to campus.
Oh,
including we brought Brian De Palma, who at that time was a fledgling director, and he stayed for a few days, showed some of his early films, one of which starred Robert De Niro. And at the end of that tenure, he offered me a job.
wow.
And yeah, here I was a senior, I was married, I had a child, and he was going to pay me $100 a week to be a production assistant in New York City. So that's why I went to law school instead. I just couldn't afford to pursue films.
Yeah.
But
You went to Buffalo. Was Buffalo a booming town then? Was there a lot of activities going on? I mean, Buffalo is a very interesting place because there's so much public art Olmsted did one of his best pieces in Buffalo, and there's a School of Architecture at the university. There are great museums. Was Buffalo, how was Buffalo as an environment for the arts?
It was absolutely night and day. It was as you describe it. It was, the art scene was alive and well. I had a couple of friends who were artists, photographers also, and the Albright Knox Gallery is there. It really was a watershed time for me and exposure to the arts. And of course, my interest in film underlay a lot of it, and I was starting to write screenplays then. So yes, Buffalo was a very positive influence.
So you were still, I'm sure, involved in some kind of way in the arts, or were you not?
Actually, I was a photographer then, and I did have some success with my photography being shown and some of it sold. But I wasn't painting at all then.
Tell us when you
Oh.
go into painting, how do you make the transition?
How did I make the transition?
Yeah, into painting.
Well, when I was here in Albany, I continued to participate in screenwriting. I wrote screenplay on my own, and I co-wrote a few, but no sale. You know, we had some interest from Manhattan, some influential people entertained at least meetings and read our stuff, said we were great, but then nothing happened. The usual story with frustrated screenwriters. So when our screenwriting group broke up, I had bought this painting for my wife, and it was by Bill Wilson, the former chairman of the art department at SUNY Albany. And there it sat in the dining room, and I saw it every day. And my outlet through film, through screenwriting, was gone. And I still had things I wanted to say, images I wanted to convey. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should try painting. So I went to the old Rensselaer County Council on the Arts and took a course. And the beginner course was filled up. So I blindly signed up for the intermediate course.
Great.
And the teacher, when we were standing at our easels, walked around in back of me and said, "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't." And she goes, "Well, I like what you're doing, and I'm going to help you." So I finished that course, and then I studied under her for several months afterward. And that was the transition for me. I started to paint.
Yeah. So did you think, when you started painting, did you think of some of the people you liked as filmmakers? Did you think of some of the photographers that you thought were great? And who were some of those? Can you remember
Sure.
the filmmakers that somehow made you feel that the way to live was to be in a visual world?
Absolutely. I kind of immersed myself fully into painting. So my influences were more at that point, not directors. They actually were painters. Trying to think who would be the most important of them. Well, certainly Lucian Freud for Flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what my style is. I mean, I typically take a figurative image and marry it to a landscape to create a narrative or story. So I find myself making films just one frame at a time now. So Balthus, as a narrative painter, had an influence on me. And of course, Hopper, a lot of my work has that restrained emotion that Hopper's famous for, and he's an influence. So those are the three influences. They're all painters. I can't say that a film director isn't among my influences.
Yeah, you can think of someone whose use of color and whose framing of subjects somehow you think of when you're painting. Is there,
Not,
especially among the foreign films? I don't know. I'm perhaps trying to discover if we share some of the same likes.
I think I was more a creature of the director's style, their narrative style, than I was their use of color. Influence on color really came from painters.
I see. So you talked about taking a figure, putting it in landscape, and I'm wondering, do you see yourself more as a landscape artist or as a portraitist? What do you consider yourself? Or if you consider yourself both, how do you combine them?
I'd have to say both, because it's not that I don't occasionally paint a landscape, as you know, and sometimes certainly what I do is a portrait. But typically and most often what I gravitate to is to, again, take that figurative image and create a landscape that I believe that fits best with that image to convey the story that I'm got in my head.
Yeah, so many of your landscapes, you don't do plein air. Many of your landscapes come from perhaps places you've seen, but they're in your head.
That's right. Plein air to me just means wind, bugs, people commenting, anything but leaving me alone to create. I like being in the studio.
Yes. So why is your mind so filled with southwestern landscapes?
Oh, that's a natural question. When I was a teenager, I was a Boy Scout, and I went to the Boy Scout ranch in Philmont, New Mexico, and I had never seen colors of sky or land like that. I don't think I even noticed, obviously in books, I must have seen them, but it was almost like I'd been transported to another world. And I thought about that every day of my life since. So when my palette came to be, lo and behold, Southwestern pigments.
Yeah, and you do it so naturally, as though you had been born in that landscape, as though it were part of you, which is really terrific. But obviously, Webster, New York was nothing like that.
No, Western New York is notoriously flat. And it's almost a joke in our family that when you drive from Albany to Buffalo, where I still have friends to visit, as you approach Rochester, everything flattens out. And sure enough, all the way to Buffalo, it's flat.
So do you think of that southwestern landscape as a kind of utopia? Is that like an idealized place to be?
I think it's inescapable. Yes, I'd have to admit to that. It is a place that in my dreams, I feel very safe, secure, warm, just the kind of place that one would perhaps describe as heaven.
And the images of people that inhabit those paintings, where do you get them? Are they people you know? Are they people you've seen that, there may be people you don't know, but you see them on a regular basis? Are they family? Are they friends? Where do you get your people?
They're more likely to be people that I don't know, who I've seen somewhere in a certain posture or pose that I file away in my head because I like that. And I'm just waiting for the right landscape to put them in. I can't say I've never painted family members. I have, but it's been more of a documentation, a family duty kind of thing, which I greatly enjoy, rather than a creative, other than in the moment doing it, rather than a creative endeavor from the get-go. But you've hit on something important. The marrying of those figurative images with a landscape brings its own problems, because it has to be just the right landscape for that image. And that image has to be positioned just right to recount what impressed me the first time when I saw them. The head has to be tipped in the right direction. The look on their face has to match what my thought was. And I understand once I'm done, people are going to see what they see. And what I intend is just one factor.
Many of your figures are quite graceful. So there's an element of they're almost like, moving through space in a very graceful way. You also have some images of figures that appear to be in pain. I'm thinking, for example, of your painting of a woman in the middle of a road. And, I'm really bad with titles of works. But she's in the middle of the road, and she is with her head down and really unhappy. You have also an image of another woman like that, I think, in indoors. And so I'm wondering, what leads you to that? What is it that makes you look at people who are happy, who are graceful, who seem to be enjoying their environment, and people who seem to be in pain?
Well, the first painting, I know the one that you're thinking of, and that actually is an interesting commentary on people, because that stemmed from a dream I had where I was lying in the road and I felt warm and safe and everything else. And I thought, well, the female figure was more interesting than me. So that's why I painted it as a woman. And then as inescapably afterward, I understand that given the world we live in, people assumed, oh, that's a body, a dead body lying in the road, or that's a woman who's been hurt or abused or whatever, because those images come to the fore so easily in our existence. But that's the truthful evolution of where that particular painting originated.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a great believer that intention is what makes the painting, because you may have the intention of doing the great American portrait, and what comes out is something else. I think the result, in one sense, and perhaps the artist is not so aware of what the result may be, even though they may be trying to achieve a particular thing. But what you achieve there is, I think it's a wonderful painting, and it is, in a sense, you could say it's a view of humanity on the road, and sort of despairing, and humanity in the shape of a woman, But I don't see it as a happy. I don't see the person there as a happy person, but as someone who is struggling in some way.
And I was aware that
about your process,
I was aware that that interpretation was certainly a valid one. And generally, I have an ego, of course, but it goes away when I paint, in the sense that I know that my intention is just one factor, that people are going to see what they see. And I revel in the differences in what they do see. And the fact that I've provoked those responses is very fulfilling to me. So my process.
Yes, I'm interested in a sense, by talking about this particular painting, we kind of are backing into your process. So I think.
Yes, I started to talk about it because when I have a figure and a landscape, there's a tension, there's a creative tension between them. And sometimes the one or both of them need to be manipulated until I get to the point where I'm happy with what I'm conveying. So typically I will start with a sketch, but I'm impatient. I want to get to painting. So I'll do the drawing on the canvas fairly quickly after some initial sketches, because I kind of know what I want to do, and I'm going to work out problems that, of course, I'm going to encounter right on the canvas.
So are there ideas that you explore, or are you mostly involved in the material world?
It's a combination of both. I have a file of ideas and sketches. Sometimes I've torn, let's say, a picture out of a magazine just because I like the way the person is standing and I don't want to forget that. So rather than take the time to make a sketch when I might not do the painting of it ever, or at least a year or 2 years hence, it's better for me to just tear that out and put it in the file.
So when do you think a painting is ready? Do you put it aside and come back to it in a week or two to see whether it's ready, or do you actually say, okay, it's ready?
Well, I'm laughing.
Something in between.
I'm laughing because the old adage that a painter never finishes a painting, they just give up. And there's some truth to that, but generally I have they're not tricks, but they're a process that I go through. When I reach the point where a painting I think is about 3/4, 80% done, I give it to my framer because that takes it out of my
Yeah.
view for a couple of weeks, where the things that I'm in love with about it or hate about it are gone. And that's a very useful time. When it comes back, it's also in a frame where it looks a little different. And I seem to know what to do at that point to finish it.
And you work in oils all the time, most of the time,
All the time.
all the time.
I like the way oils handle light. I like the luminescence. I like the ability to glaze with thinned paint with oil. I like that they don't dry quickly like acrylics. I know you can retard the drying, but I don't want to, that's another step I'd have to go through. I'm comfortable with oils, and watercolors, frankly, scare the bejesus out of me because every stroke has such import. Whereas with oils, I can just paint over something or scrape it away.
So did you ever try just to experiment with gouache or with acrylics or with pastels or anything else? Did you ever try, not as not because you were going to be did you ever experiment with those?
I think if I'd gone to art school, I certainly would have tried. But because I'm older and I feel that I have X number of years to do what I want to do, I've got all these paintings I want to do and they're in oil. So no, I have not, and I stick with oil.
Yeah. So did you find someone, let's say in the last 20 years, when you were already painting, that said something to you that taught you something about painting?
It's happened along the way. One example was actually, I'm happy to say, in Puerto Rico. I was in Puerto Rico with my wife vacationing, and I brought a couple of art magazines with me. And I read about a painter whose work I enjoyed, and he liked to use gold or copper acrylic paintings as underpainting. You know, you can't paint those on top of oils, but you can put oils over them. So the next few paintings that I did employ that, and I like the results. And I often will think about that when I approach a new work, whether I'm going to roll out the gold or the copper.
That's great. What would you consider the most flattering or the most flattering thing someone could say to you about your painting? What pleases you the most?
I don't remember who it was, but someone once said that they really liked my open-ended narratives that were beautiful, but also sometimes unsettling, which caused them to think in areas that they would not necessarily have thought.
Right. Oh, a question. Do you have several paintings that you work on at the same time, or do you just dedicate yourself to one?
When I first started to paint about 30 years ago, I really would only focus on one. I was terrified that if I moved away from that, somehow I would lose whatever focus I had, or I would get sidetracked. But then I quickly realized that there are times when I'm frustrated with a painting and I need an outlet. So working on another work was that kind of outlet, and I started working on more than one. Presently, I'm working on a commission piece for a woman in Monroe County, and it's a pier landscape. I'm reproducing a photograph that she wanted me to reproduce. And it's got its own challenges because, turning, a two-dimensional photograph into something that not only pleases her because she initially responded to the photographic image, but also allows me some artistic input. And that's, it's a little tight, kind of a high wire act, to please both sides, myself and her. So that takes a lot of emotional and psychic energy. So I'll have a second painting that I'm working on that's smaller that I can jump to when I'm frustrated or bored with the commission piece.
That's great. Looking forward to seeing the non-commissioned piece, the smaller painting, when you're ready with that. So I'm wondering, what does painting bring to your life, and how do you respond to those feelings that that painting gives you?
I think I've always needed a creative outlet, even when I was a child. And it would show up in different ways. Like when I was in Little League, I had the record for stolen bases. You know, I just thought it was fun to steal. And I was pretty fast for a short distance. And if you look at that sort of thing, when I was on swim team in high school, I delighted in pulling opposing swimmers off the blocks by being twitchy when I'm standing there instead of waiting for the gun. So films, of course, you know, and I went down that road a long way before switching to painting. But I'm so fulfilled with painting. I have such a feeling of fulfillment. I don't know what retirement would be without that. Maybe I wouldn't have retired from the work world when I did if I didn't have painting.
Well, I know that I like looking at many of your paintings. There's always something interesting to see. Sometimes they're an intellectual challenge. They're not simplistic in any way whatsoever. They may have contradictory images, for me anyway, you know, which makes them in perhaps more than contradictory, let me say paradoxical, which makes them for me a deeper kind of piece to look at. So I hope that you continue being fulfilled by your painting, so that you continue painting, and those of us who like your work will have more enjoyment. And I thank you for spending this afternoon chatting with me. And if anybody's interested in Gary's work, it is available at Martinez Gallery and also through First Dibs, which means that you know, anyone around the world would be able to purchase one of his works. You want to say anything, any last words to our audience, whoever it may be?
Well, thank you for those observations. I'm so glad that you do like my work and you've been extremely supportive. I'm going to continue to present paradox because I think we all grow from the challenge of confronting a paradox and going whatever way we go in resolving it. And that's probably something that is an undercurrent in the work I do. So thanks for pointing that out.
Great. Thank you very much. And we'll be talking soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye now.